Welcome to the channel, guys. My name is Ayomide. If this is your first time here, you are absolutely welcome. First of all, I would like to say Happy New Year to everybody watching this video. This tutorial is on how I made this ankle length kimono gown, and it is not the usual kimono that usually have a shawl around. Rather, I use a bias binding to finish off the neckline and the slits of this kimono. If you want to learn how I made this, then you should see this video till the very end. Now let us get started. This is the material I am going to be working with. It is 2.5 yards. Now I would advise that if you are above size 6, that's from size 8 and above, you should use 3 yards. I'm a size 6, so that's worked for me. This is the pattern I'm going to be working on, and I'm going to be using this pattern to cut both the front and the back. Now if you look at this pattern, you will see that it looks boxy, and that's because I want the jacket, I want the gown to be free. On my pattern right here, I have my chest line, I also have the waistline and the hip line. Now what I did with this pattern was that I used the widest circumference of my body, which is my hip measurement. I divided it by 4 and I added 1.5 inch ease allowance. The ease allowance you're going to be adding is going to be dependent on how free you want it to be, and I placed that measurement on the chest line. I placed the same measurement on the waistline and also on the hip line. That is why everything looks equal. And in addition to the measurement, I added 1 inch side seam allowance, so that once I place this on my fabric, I'm just going to be cutting it out directly. Now the 1.5 inch ease allowance depends on how free you want your pattern to be. Now moving on to the other alterations. For the neck width, I used a neck width of 2.5 inches. Initially, I used 3 inches, but I readjusted it back to 2.5 because this is a jacket and you don't want the neck to be too wide. Then for the back, I'm going for 0.5 inch. You shouldn't go below 0.5 inch because of the back, it's the back, it shouldn't be too wide. Now for the front, I marked 3 inches above the waistline and I connected it from the shoulder point up until the 3 inches that I am marked, and that will be my breaking point. If you'll be making jackets, you should be conversant with the term breaking point. The next thing I'll go ahead to do is to draw in my armhole, and as usual, I'm marking 3 inches above, I'm marking 0.75 inch and 0.5 inch inward, and I'm drawing my armhole. Remember, I said I'm using this pattern for both the front and the back, even though the length is short, but we are going to be readjusting the length on the fabric. Now that's my back armhole, and the inner one is the front armhole. So what I'll go ahead and do now is to cut out this pattern. So this is the pattern. I cut it out around the back neckline and also around the back armhole, meaning we are going to be cutting on the fabric. We're going to be cutting the back side on the fabric first of all. So what I will do is I'm going to be placing my fabric on fold into 2, place my pattern on it, which I have done already, and I'm going to be adjusting the length. Remember, I said this jacket is an ankle length. I'm going to be adjusting it to my desired length, and I'm also going to be adding the necessary seam allowance. My table is quite short, that's why you can see the other part of the pattern paper is not showing. So if you have a short table, not so wide table like mine, you can work with your pattern up until the hip line and extend the length. It makes your work easier, and it also makes sure that you are doing the right thing without any mistakes. Now for the shoulder line, I want my back shoulder to be 1 inch longer. There's a way it sits into your shoulder, so I'm marking 1 inch in addition to half an inch I would use to connect to the front. By doing this, I'm also going to be readjusting the shoulder for the front, so the back shoulder is going to be 1 inch longer than the front shoulder. So I marked 1 inch plus half inch, that is 1.5 inch. The half inch is the joining allowance to the front. I'm done with that. Now moving over to the front, the next thing I'll do is to trim off the armhole so that I can have my front armhole. And once I'm done trimming off the armhole, I'm also going to be trimming off the neckline to reveal my front neckline. So this is how you can use your pattern one pattern paper to draft both the front and the back. Remember, we did alterations to the shoulder for the back. Now for the alteration for the front shoulder, I'm only going to be taking off half an inch because I need half an inch to join it to the back. So instead of taking off 1 inch, which is how long my back is going to be longer than the front, I'm also going to be making room for my seam allowance by taking off just half an inch. So that's what I'm going over to do. You can apply this to your shirt also, and also other forms of kimono jackets that you want to work on. So guys, I've gone ahead to place my pattern on fold like I did for the back, and I've also extended the length and added my required hemming allowance. What I'll go ahead and do next is to cut out the front too. While cutting out the neckline around the front, I left about 1/4 inch allowance, which is going to be the allowance I'm going to be using for my bias binding. You can also leave this allowance if you are going to be using a shawl around the front neckline. And also remember, you are going to be splitting the front into two, but we are not going to be splitting the back. And so just in case you're wondering what I'm doing, I splitted my front into two. These are my fabric pieces. I have my back fabric piece on the table already, and this is the part of the front that corresponds with this part of the back. I would go ahead and join it around the shoulder and equally join it around the sides with my 1 inch side sewing allowance all the way down, and repeat likewise for the other part of my front too. I have joined my front and back fabric pieces together, and while editing I realized that I must have mistakenly deleted the video where I recorded how I joined the bias binding. So what I did was I picked up my commercially produced bias tape and then placed one part of it on the wrong side of this jacket and sew it all the way down around the front neckline, which is what I've done. Afterwards, I'm going to be using the other part to cover up the stitch while still making sure that my bias binding is showing. So the goal of this is to use the bias binding to create some sort of design, and if you're doing this, make sure you use a bias binding that has one color on your fabric, that has a matching color on your fabric. You don't want to use a bias binding that the color is off and it doesn't go well with the fabric. So once I cover it all the way down, I'll go ahead and sew it, and this is a close-up view of what I just did. This is the result. I stitched it on the wrong side first of all, and then covered it up on the right side. And I like to cover it up on the right side so that I can control my stitch. You can do it either ways, but I would advise you to stitch it on the wrong side first of all, and then finish off your stitch on the right side. I'm also going to be making a belt for this kimono, and I have two fabric pieces here because I couldn't get one long piece. I will join them together, after which I'm going to be placing right sides against each other and finish off the raw edges so that I can have my belt neatly finished. Afterwards, I'm going to be fixing a sleeve around the armhole of the kimono, and that would be all for this tutorial. Guys, this is the outcome of the jacket. I love the way the bias binding gave it a very unique design, different from the usual shawl that we normally fix around the neckline. And you could try this out also. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, kindly join the community. Click on the subscribe button below. And until my next tutorial, guys, make sure you have a wonderful day and happy new year once